Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I'm sitting in the backyard of my Portland, Oregon permaculture garden in Zone 8B, and the crows are all ticked off. We're having this epic battle between crows and scrub jays the last few days. You can see behind me Akebia quinata. This is the chocolate vine, and I'm in the process of, I took a cutting of my big one in a different part of the garden, and I am training this across my pergola. And before I get into the topic of today's video, yes, I burnt my lip. So before there are comments down below, yes, it hurts. It hurts. I'm still gonna make this video. There may also be some ambient noise in the background because it's so nice out. My neighbors are also out working on their own projects. That's just the way it goes when you live in the city. You have neighbors and they are living in their houses and working on their gardens as well. Today I want to talk about a subject that I have touched on multiple times over the past few years, and it's something that it may tick off the only natives plant crowd and the hardcore food foresters and the vegan activists and the militant crunchy moms. And my intent is not to tick anybody off, it's just to put out an alternate viewpoint. So I think there's a difference between an ideal that we can be striving for and a fixation that sort of clouds out all other viewpoints and all other potential goals, right? And other opportunities and other ways of thinking. And, I think in sustainable living movements, particularly, in permaculture, or when people are really passionate about wanting to create a better world, that kind of zealotry can creep in a way that's unhelpful and really makes it harder for us to achieve our goals and harder for us to build bonds in community. Let's take, for example, the only natives plant crowd. I made a video over a year ago that was actually talking about a meme that somebody else had made, because at that particular point in time on the internet, there were some really amped up folks who were passionate and interested in planting native plants. My phone is giving me a ding, sorry about that. And that's great. Yes, there's a lot of good in saying we know native plants are better in many respects. We know that it's a really good goal to want to not only conserve but regenerate wild habitat to create a space where our local flora and fauna can thrive. And we know that a lot of our native plants have been replaced by ornamental plants, but also by concrete and asphalt. And so we want to create habitat, and that's a really good thing. We know that in a lot of circumstances, native plants are better adapted, more resilient, although in a changing climate, and I talked about this recently, that may not be the case, and there's some data to show that may not be the case, and that we may have to look beyond natives. Okay, so that's all well and good. I made this video at a point in time where the only natives crowd, and there are still very active groups on social media that are only natives, were quite combative, right? And so the person who made this comic or this meme came from a place of their own lived experience, and when they shared it online, it got hundreds and hundreds of likes and tons of reshares. And I found it really funny because I'd been yelled at by these same kind of people. So I get comments on that video all the time where people are insulting me or are really angry with me because, the viewpoint that they would put forth is native plants are better in many respects. Therefore, it means you should convert 80 to 100% of your yard to natives immediately. That's what current research shows. It shows that it's really good to plant natives in your garden, and especially native plants are able to support more native wildlife. And I was just saying, could we just pause on that for a second and say that there are good things about planting natives, but there's lots of reasons that people can't or don't want to plant all natives in their garden. It's good to create a habitat for native wildlife, but most of us are on a limited budget. We have limited energy, and we want to use our gardens for other things, right? I hate lawns. I don't have a lawn. I understand why some folks might want a patch of lawn and they might want to use that. And so while my own personal aspiration is a lawnless garden, and that's what I've got, I understand why other folks might want one. And I understand they might have legitimate reasons for not ripping out their lawn. And they don't have to necessarily justify those reasons to me or anybody else, any other stranger on the internet. So the argument that I was trying to make there, and in some subsequent videos, is that, if you're like most of us, you're living in late stage capitalism, you're struggling to get through each day, you have a limited budget, you have limited energy, and you just don't have the bandwidth to rip out everything in your yard, much less the funds to do it or the time to implement it, and put in an only natives garden. Or you might be taking the very precious little amount of time you have on your lunch break and going to the plant nursery, and you're picking up, a varietal of some plant that you think is beautiful. And you're like, this is all I've got the energy for today. I'm going to buy this, Cheyenne Spirit Echinacea, because that's what's here at the garden center. And I don't have time to go research and get anything else. And I just want to put some flowers in my garden. You shouldn't be getting screamed at by people on the internet who say you need to plant the straight species or else. And it's absolutely okay to say, I don't have the bandwidth to go whole hog on this particular cause that is somebody else's pet cause, right? When you're giving so much of yourself to just keep your household afloat in what is essentially an untenable situation, an untenable culture of consumption, we have to ask, what feels doable for you? So instead of saying, I'm going to school you and let you know very clearly that the plants you have are not native, and as if that is somehow a judgment against you, and as if you are somehow failing in your aspirations to live sustainably, I'm going to say, you know what? What if I said, what feels doable for you? What if I said, are there small ways you could engage on this issue? For me, it looked like picking 3 spots in my garden, pulling out some non-natives and plunking in natives. And then expanding beyond that to looking at what is involved in becoming a certified backyard wildlife habitat. But it started really incrementally, right? It started with putting some things around my veg and my roses and tucked in amongst my fruit trees. I have no interest in ripping out all of my fruit trees because they feed my family and my broody duck. I'm not going to take those things out. I am going to find how I can work in more natives in a way that feels doable for me. And for that, I continue to take a lot of flack, and I see other folks taking flack. And so just say that zealotry is really misplaced. I'm not going to be convinced to rip out all of my garden and put in 100% natives. And that kind of militant engagement is not going to get people to step in to the process and want to have more natives. So let me give you another example here. We know that CAFO farming is really bad for the environment. We know that animals are exploited in CAFO farming, and that is confinement animal feedlot operation. I think it's called battery farming in Europe. We know that workers are exploited in this environment. And if you live in America, there might be minors working illegally in these situations, or I think it's in Arkansas where they have loosened the law to allow for child labor because nobody wants to work butchering animals or cleaning up after butchering animals or working in industrial agriculture when it comes to meat production. So apparently they're loosening the law to let children do it. Welcome to late stage capitalism. We know the industrial food complex is inhumane and unsustainable. It's absolutely normal to feel incredibly strong emotions about that, to feel outrage at injustice and suffering, both for people and for animals and for the planet as a whole. My beans are done in the Instant Pot. Give it a second. Okay. One way folks strive to reduce the harm that is caused by the industrial meat production system in the United States is to become vegan. There's a difference between saying I'm making a personal choice to live in a way that I feel aligns with my values and my ethics, and screaming at somebody on the internet and calling them a murderer and carnist trash and all of the other comments that myself and other omnivores get called. That's not a way to engage around this issue that is going to end any CAFO farming production, right? That's not a way to engage around this issue that's likely to change hearts and minds at all. It makes those kinds of militant vegan activists feel really morally superior and feel really good in expressing their outrage, but it's not actually changing the system, and it's probably a big turnoff to people. Definitely is a turnoff to me. My family chose to eat no meat for several years until we could afford to buy locally produced, ethically produced meat, and we still don't eat very much. It was an expense that we couldn't afford for many years, and so we did without. But I realized that not everybody has that option to opt out of eating meat or to, at some point in time, afford the expense of buying a quarter or a half a cow from a local farmer. And not everybody has the option to raise their own eggs, etc., etc. I didn't expect other people to engage in the same behaviors I engaged in. There are times that I'm out and about, that I eat at a restaurant or at a friend's house that is not necessarily aligned with my concept of ethical eating, right? Where I know my friend is going to serve me food that is probably factory farmed, and I am not going to turn it down. That's a personal choice that I make. I'm doing the best that I can in a world where multi-billion-dollar systems are set up for exploitation and harm and suffering for both animals and people. And I don't personally view it as my job to beat Goliath single-handedly, especially when I'm kind of barely keeping my head above water as it is. So I guess what I'm saying here is two things, two main points I want to make. Permaculture is radical. It's absolutely radical, especially in a world that is set up for, consumerism and exploitation. That doesn't mean that the only way to create a resilient society, or even an effective strategy for creating a resilient society, is by making sweeping radical changes, by engaging in a confrontational and radical way, in a zealous way with the world. People will do what feels approachable for them. If it feels overwhelming, folks will simply throw up their hands and say, no, thank you, right? And so we can't be demanding that people plant only natives. We can't be demanding that people eat exactly the way that we feel is an ethical way to eat. Many other kind of zealous ways that we can engage as people who want sustainable living, right? Like, I try to wear all natural clothing. I fail. I have leggings that have lycra in them. I have wool socks that have 25% nylon in them. No, I'm not able to fully engage with my ethics in a way that is 100% pure. And in some ways, I think that's really good, because it makes me stop and say, like, actually, it's not possible in this culture, in the way that we live now, in the systems of power that are set up, the systems of profit that are set up, to do anything perfectly. Because I am just one person, and so I'll do the best that I can. Permaculture is radical, but we can't ask folks to engage in a way that feels overwhelming to them, or they won't at all. Something that a Sunday school teacher talked about when I was a kid was this story of starfish on the beach, and how there's I think I've told this story before, but there's a big storm, and it washes up hundreds and hundreds of starfish. And a woman is walking along the beach and picking up one starfish and throwing it back into the ocean. They're like way above the tide line because it was a freak storm. And they're baking in the sun. So she's picking up one starfish, throwing it back in the water, picking up the next one, throwing it back in the water. And a guy comes by and he's like, well, what are you doing? Like, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of starfish on this beach. You can't save all of them. And the woman says, yes, but I can save this one. And I can save this one. Right? And I think that that's a really, really good way to approach kind of everything in life, but especially when we're in a system where we don't have control, right? In that story, the woman didn't have control over the storms, over Mother Nature. And so she engaged in a way that worked to make a difference in permaculture, slow, small solutions, to make those little bits of difference that can add up to a really big picture. And, when we ask people to engage in kind of a zealous purity fallacy mindset, they're not gonna pick up any starfish and throw them back into the water. They're gonna say, holy crap, this beach is covered. I don't even know where to step in. If you're asking me to clear the whole beach, I'm just like, I'm not gonna start, because I don't know how to. If we say, can you help me pick up 3 starfish and throw them back in the water, they're gonna say, yeah, I'll lend a hand. The second point I wanna make is that you catch more flies with honey. If we build connections, if we weave slowly, right? Like if I'm weaving on my loom, right? I'm doing one pass of the shuttle this way and one pass this way, and I'm slowly building up the shawl that I'm weaving, one row at a time, right? One pass of the weft at a time through the warp. And I think that's what we're looking at when we are looking at building a more sustainable and resilient culture. Shaming, screaming, huge, daunting challenges and demands rarely change minds and rarely build a different way, a better way of being. They certainly don't build confidence, and they don't create an access point, right? I have to start my weave at the beginning down here and go back and forth. I'm not going to have a whole tapestry out of nowhere. And I think that that is what is important when we're asking people to engage in a way that feels doable for them. We're giving them a point of entry, right? And we're starting them on their journey, or we're assisting them in beginning their own journey, I should say. The other day at the park, I was talking with my friend Jessica, and we were talking about this whole purity mindset, this whole kind of militant mindset, and how unhelpful it is for making change. And she was saying, like, you don't know what foundations you're laying, what boundaries you are pushing farther back to create more room for somebody else in the future. We don't know the small changes that we're making now, how they will help somebody else more easily access resilient living in the future. And how they will make it easier for other people to change the culture and to change the laws. So I think there's some hubris in expecting that we're going to single-handedly end industrial agriculture or rebuild native ecosystems. If we don't do everything 100% perfectly, us as individuals, those things will never happen. There's a lot of hubris in that. There's a level of arrogance in that. There's foolishness in expecting other people to feel the same way, that they have to single-handedly solve the problem by doing everything 100% or not at all. And I think, like Jessica was saying, and I think that there's a lot of goodness in remembering that we can do what we're able. We can plug in a way that folds into the context of our lives, and with whatever little bit of bandwidth that we have, that helps tear down barriers for folks that come after us, right? We are creating, one block in a quilt. I'm using all the fiber arts metaphors today. One block in a quilt. And we aren't expected to finish the whole thing. What we're trying to do is build a more resilient world in a way that creates connection instead of separation, in a way that is efficacious instead of foolhardy, right? And that's what I've been trying to say in my videos now for a few years. And it's interesting to me how angry folks get at that notion of, like, it doesn't have to all be on your shoulders, and it's not realistic. And my neighbors are done banging. It certainly is not fair of us to put it on the shoulders of other individuals. What we want to do is do the best that we can and be content with that. So I would encourage you to plug in a way that feels approachable and doable for you. See if there's one thing you could do or three things you could do. Are there 3 starfish you could pick up and throw back into the ocean? But also, when you engage with other people, if you're somebody who does things at 80 or 100%, and I will say, part of the reason that I rehash this topic a little bit now and again is because I have a tendency to be really zealous and really get her done 100 million%, and feel like a failure when I don't achieve really lofty goals. And so this message is for myself as much as it is for everybody else. Just remember that the small changes that we make can make a big difference. And when we are engaging with other people, we want to be encouragers to them. We want to make them feel that they can make a difference and that they can get their toe in the water. They can ease into something in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming and doesn't make them say, like, whoa, I'm just not going to bother. But instead encourages them to come along, right? And makes it feel like a rewarding journey. So thanks for listening today. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and please check out my Patreon. The support of my patrons helps me continue making these videos and helps support my family. Construction is gearing up a little bit next door, and so I'm going to get going, but I'll be back really soon for my permaculture garden here in Portland, Oregon. Bye-bye.